Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are joining me today. Today I'm going to be talking to you on the lovely subject of ransomware, taken with a vengeance. So many of you will know this quote very, very well, as uttered by Liam Neeson during the film Taken. What would it feel like, really? What would it feel like to be able to say something like this to whoever it is that is attacking you, whoever it is that is trying to throw malware and ransomware at your network? How good would that feel to be able to say something like this and then actually see it through? Possibly with a few Hollywood antics, possibly with a few fights and a few dust ups, and then at the end you come out victorious and sign up for another two films. But unfortunately, we live in the real world, and this is not something that we can do on a regular basis. So let's look at ransomware as it stands. Let's look at the what, the when, the why. Go back in time a little bit, see when the first one happened and came about, and actually understand how it has evolved over time. So, firstly, taking a look at the problem itself. Last year, the FBI at RSA conference in San Francisco stated that ransomware had netted $145 million in 2019 alone. And of that $145 million, 86 million was the result of just two kits, two pieces of ransomware, the Ryuk and the Crisis Dharma variants. That's a huge amount of money for really just putting a piece of malware onto a network, encrypting the devices, and then forcing people to pay. Obviously, in this instance, criminality does sometimes pay, even though we really should not be applauding that. So this is a big problem. And then when you multiply what we've actually gone through over 2020 and into 2021, and the level of phishing attacks that have gone up through the roof, this ransomware problem has become huge, even beyond these figures here. So let's go back right to the beginning. 1989, the Berlin Wall came down, and the first known piece of ransomware came out, the AIDS cop Trojan. This was distributed via floppy disk. Yes, you almost literally had to install this malware yourself. And what it did was it would monitor the autoexec.bat of your computer. And on roughly the 80th reboot, you would find that your directories were being hidden and your contents were being encrypted. You had to send $189 to a PO box in the Philippines in order to get your files back. So the one good thing in its favor was it only used symmetric encryption, but nonetheless, very successful piece of malware. The creator was actually arrested, was found unfit to face trial, and actually donated all of the findings to AIDS research, hence the name. So very interesting first piece of malware there. If we fast forward quite a few years, 16 years to 2005, a fabulous year for Dom Perignon, but also the first time that asymmetric encryption was used. So making it much, much harder for us to decrypt the contents of whatever it was that was being held to ransom. And so making it, a slightly more professional version of ransomware as we know it today. Fast forward again, 2013, the Chinese Year of the Snake. And this is when we see the very first Bitcoin being used for payment. So a real untraceable mechanism for payment, which meant, of course, that it made the use of ransomware a far more safer bet for the criminals around the world. And as we know, Bitcoin has just gone crazy. So this mechanism for payment is not going away anytime soon, be it Bitcoin or Dogecoin or even any other kind of cryptocurrency that's out there. And then in our final whistle stop tour of history, 2017, Wannacry and NotPetya. This is the image you're looking at is actually the Rosetta Stone in the British Museum in 2017. The British Museum actually did some advertising and some marketing around the Rosetta Stone, and this is actually quite salient here because Wannacry was made available in 20 different languages. Malware and ransomware had truly become customer focused and international. Cyber criminals were making it as easy as possible for you to give them money. Funny how that works out. Now we go on to the last story here of this section. The UK's National Cyber Security Centre, the NCSC, they released a story just a few months ago in late 2020 about a UK company that was hit by ransomware and ended up paying the £6 million ransom demanded of the attackers in order to decrypt their systems and get moving. That was obviously a big decision, and £6 million is quite a considerable amount of money. The problem was, and the reason why the NCSC highlighted this was what they didn't do subsequently was fix the problem in the first place. 2 weeks later, they got hit by exactly the same version of malware and had to pay again. Now, I've heard tale that actually the owners of that piece of malware are now assigning them a technical manager in order to help them through the process and to pay them far more quickly in the future. But joking aside, this really does go to show how prevalent ransomware can be out in the wild at the moment. So let's look at that evolution of encryption over time. So in the early days, whenever ransomware hit your system, it immediately encrypted everything. It just found a system, it encrypted it, end of story. No situational awareness, there was no intelligence or anything like that. Purely the moment it hit a computer, it would encrypt it. Then it kind of evolved. The Trojan element of it evolved, took on the attributes of a worm. It would spread itself first. It would hit the machine. It would wait. It would try and make connections, spread itself across the network, and then it would encrypt your files. So it was aiming to do maximum damage, and therefore increase your likelihood of paying and paying more money. And nowadays, we've got really quite insidious levels of malware. Not only it dials home the moment it hits a computer, it tells the owner of the malware exactly where it is and what it's doing. It establishes a strategy even. It's working out what are the crown jewels of this company. It's encrypting files selectively. Of course, it's spreading as it's going, but it's encrypting certain files selectively. It's ascertaining even the ability to pay, and perhaps most damaging of all is it's corrupting and deleting backups. So you can't refuse to pay and just restore from a backup. You really do have to pay in order to get hold of your data back. Now, recently in 2020, the US government announced that various countries, etc., are on a ban list for passing any kind of cryptocurrency payment, especially when in the case of ransomware. So actually, you're caught between a rock and a hard place in some instances, whereby if you don't pay, you've lost all your data, you've lost all your backups. And if you do pay, you're going to get the wrath of the government on you for actually subsidizing potential terrorism and drugs trafficking, etc., as a result of what you're doing. Really not a great place to be. And this is the point that I'm truly trying to make here, is that this is not your grandfather's ransomware anymore. This is ransomware that attacks everyone, not just the people on the end of the computer, not just the companies of the computer, but also the clients of that company. Certain medical companies recently have had their patients contacted by the attackers to say, we've ransomed your data, you need to pay us a smaller sum of money so we don't release it, and also put pressure on your healthcare provider to ensure that they pay us even more to make sure we don't release it. So they go round, they threaten everyone. They even reuse the stolen data because they will copy that data first. So it's not just a case of encrypting it on site, they will copy it offline. They will have their own copy. And then even if you pay the ransom, they will then subsequently go off and potentially auction or use that data for their benefits, which in the case of credit cards and financial information can be really quite damaging. And it will publicly shame as well. So they will make announcements about the level of damage that they have inflicted on a company at the same time as that company is trying to go through a damage limitation exercise in order to ensure share prices don't crash, etc. So this is a very insidious, very dangerous cat and mouse game that's going on, and that is encompassing everyone. It's not just the big companies that are being attacked, it's the big companies and their clients and their customers as a result of this. And examples of this are everywhere. Here, this first example, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, SpaceX, documents were leaked by the ransomware gang. Not sure if they were actually paid for in that instance, but nonetheless, they were leaked anyway. Even if you pay, you may not get your data back in the first place. Kenneth Cole Productions, the attackers actually made public statements on Twitter around the fact that they had attacked Kenneth Cole, they had their data, and they were willing and able to release it. And there's plenty more examples from around the world and every industry, everything from celebrities to companies to healthcare and hospitals and charities, all being attacked, all having to either pay pay ransoms, or trying to recover from backups that may not exist, or simply starting from scratch again. This is not good news. So let's now, in the second part of this talk, let's look at the vectors of attack, because when we understand how the ransomware is getting in, then we can actually do something about it. So the first one, phishing and social engineering. This is probably the number one example and the number one mechanism that any kind of malware, and specifically ransomware, will get in. Phishing will be targeted in many cases. They will encourage the emails and the messages and even the telephone conversations will encourage and instill a sense of urgency, a sense of dread potentially, and a sense of actual complications if their actions aren't carried out. Files will be downloaded, they will be clicked on, websites will be visited, and files downloaded again and installed, and the ransomware goes from there. So this is the number one mechanism. Social engineering, for instance, where you're actually trying to encourage people that their computers are broken, that you are from the IT department and you need them to install TeamViewer or a file for them to get access to your computer. Again, downloading the file yourself. You're actually installing this thing yourself. You know, the irony is horrible here. Secondly, compromised websites in the first place. So when you visit a website and that website has actually been attacked and you click to either download something or even if it's loading code to bring up a particular page, that vulnerable website can be used to push a malware package down to your computer and potentially install it, even if it's installing it within the browser, etc. It's giving them access to it in the first place. So knowing when a website has been compromised, very challenging. Knowing where there are websites that are deliberately trying to fool people to connect to them. So for instance, sending you a link to a parcel delivery company and telling you that you need to go to their website in order to confirm details before they deliver your brand new iPad or whatever. Doing that is actually going to put you at a huge risk of installing this malware and ransomware as a result. Malvertising and breaching the browser. So not everybody, like this gentleman here, can actually read HTML, can actually understand what's going on under the hood on a website. So sometimes a, a website will deliver bad advertising, malevolent advertising that takes advantage of vulnerabilities in your web browser. So these might be zero-day vulnerabilities. They might be known vulnerabilities that you haven't patched. But that advertising, which pops up without you doing anything apart from literally visiting the website, could be enough to deliver that payload to your computer. Then there is the Pirate Bay, for instance, which has gone offline now, obviously, but there are plenty of other sites and peer-to-peer sharing sites and BitTorrent sites, etc., where people will download illegal copies of films and TV, etc. That's the case for that is a whole other ethical and moral discussion. However, many of these sites are created in order to encourage people to go to them, find the shows they want and download them. And within those files are actually malware payloads that as soon as you play the movie will install and will put your computer at risk. Even if you find even applications that have been cracked so you don't need to put a serial number in, exactly the same thing. This is why it's important for employees and your family to understand that going to these sites puts you at a massive risk of ransomware, malware, viruses, anything of the kind. And also messaging applications. So this is, for instance, Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp. The file types that can be attacked, so like the SVG, the scalable vector graphics format, that is actually based on XML. So it's an image format based on XML. Because it's XML, you can embed malicious code inside of that. So when you start sharing images from people you don't know, that you don't trust, those executables could come down onto your mobile phone, onto your tablet, or even onto your computer and execute there accordingly. And finally, we've got brute force, the good old traditional brute force. The use of tools like Shodan, for instance, which will scan the internet for you, looking for open RDP ports that you can connect to, and then use various other tools, such as Jack the Ripper or whatever, to try and brute force your way onto those systems with either simple or well-known passwords from rainbow tables, for instance. The simple brute force attack is a way that people can connect to your machines and deliver their payloads, their malicious payloads to your systems without you knowing it. This really does undermine the importance of making sure you follow good security hygiene at all times. So really, where do we go from here? Well, there are three things that I think are key to addressing ransomware. The first one is education and awareness, and subsequently empowerment. As I've said a number of times, we find ourselves actually unknowingly installing this malware ourselves. Knowing what these attack vectors are, knowing what the threats are, will give us a much better idea as individuals as to what might be happening or how people are trying to manipulate us in order to download and install these applications. Secondly, I'd be remiss if I didn't say endpoint protection and endpoint detection and response. Obviously. I mean, look at this lady just here. She's happily working at home, and she's happy because she lives in a lovely place, everything's clean and tidy, and she knows that her endpoint, her laptop, is protected. If she does something on the off chance, accidentally go into a website that she shouldn't go to, she knows that actually her endpoint is protected, that there is detection and response capabilities built in. No word of a lie. These sorts of things are table stakes nowadays. The use of just a protection mechanism is no longer feasible in today's environments. And finally, perhaps one that very few of us can do something about, but we should all be encouraged to get involved in, is there needs to be global government cooperation and legislation. As I mentioned earlier, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is the number one mechanism for getting funds from you into a pot that can't be traced. And those are quite considerable sums of money. If there is to be any potential regulation of cryptocurrency or any kind of government involvement, this would be one of the reasons for it. Again, we could debate the ethics and the morals and the actual technological implications of doing something like this. But in reality, ransomware is not going to go away until you can cut off the source of the funds in the first place. Thank you very much for listening to me today. You can contact me at either of these two internet residencies. I'm very much looking forward to hearing from you, and thank you again.